We are finishing up our series today called A Meal with Jesus, and I'm going to invite back to the stage Harrison. He is our student pastor, and he's going to deliver the message, and he's going to tell another story about Jesus and food. And I believe we know in Grace Kids, this is what we say. We'll see. Hopefully this works. The story comes from the Bible, and all of the stories in the Bible are... Thank you. Oh, my goodness. Yes, it's true. I have a feeling, though, Harrison, that this story might be a little fishy.
Yeah, maybe.
Good luck, buddy.
Thanks, Terry. All right, so one time I broke an $8,000 piece of equipment by pressing a button. No, it did not look like that. If it had looked that big and red and scary, I probably would have given it a second thought. No, what it looked like was this. In fact, it looked exactly like that. I have a friend that still works at that church, so I had him this week go and take a picture of the piece of equipment for me. That very innocent-looking power button belongs to a piece of equipment called a UPS, which has nothing to do with brown delivery vans. It stands for uninterruptible power supply, and without getting into nerdy details, the purpose of a UPS is to make sure that everything plugged into it never loses power. Because there's some things that have a specific way they need to be turned off. So the way it works is you plug a bunch of stuff into a UPS, and then the UPS plugs into the wall. Now when your building has power, it's like, everything's coming from the wall just like normal. But if you have a power outage, in a fraction of a second, the device switches over to battery power, because there's some big old batteries in the UPS. So the idea is that nothing that's plugged into this will lose power. So I was new to the job, and my team's job was to run maintenance on all of the equipment throughout the week. And my job this month was to replace UPS batteries, because you want them fresh if they're going to be needed. And as I come and I look at this, I've never worked with production systems of this scale. I'm still new to the job. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I have a wiring diagram, like how to undo the batteries and redo them. So as I look at it, my first thought is, there's a lot of power going through this. Those are really big batteries. And if I'm going to now remove a metal tray, the first thing I should do is to turn it off. Well, I did. And 5 minutes into that, one of my friends who was on the team walks in. I hear the door open behind me. And he's still a dear friend, but he does not have a good poker face. He just can't hide his emotion. So he walks in, and I look, and his jaw is hanging half open. And he just points somewhere over my head and says, Why is it off? And I didn't know what he was talking about in the moment, but as I was elbows deep in power cables, I figured I was the problem. And sure enough, I was. So when I had hit that innocent button, it had cut all of the power to everything plugged into the UPS. And so he tells me this, and then we frantically get everything plugged back in, get it back turned on. But in the process, there was one piece of equipment, a video card, that was $8,000, and it had been fried. By pressing one button, I had made a huge mistake. Now, we open today with that story because we're going to read a story from the Bible that has somebody in it that made a really big mistake. You guys can go ahead and open up your Bibles to John chapter 21. As you guys are getting there, I want to give you some background on this story. So what we're reading today takes place a couple of weeks after Easter Sunday, and it's a really weird time for Jesus' disciples. So all of the guys that followed Jesus around during his ministry, they had jobs and lives before they met Jesus. But then he came along and said, hey, drop what you're doing and come follow me. And so they did for 3.5 years. But then, to their surprise, but not Jesus's, one night, Jesus is arrested. And this night, before Jesus gets arrested, he talks to one of his disciples, a guy named Peter, and he says, Peter, you should know that before the rooster crows tomorrow, it's before tomorrow starts, you will have denied me 3 times. And Peter's like, no, there's no way I'm going to do that, Jesus. I love you. But sure enough, Jesus is arrested, and then through the night, 3 times Peter denies Jesus. He messes up in a really, really big way. Then, as we all know, on Good Friday, Jesus dies, he's crucified, but then 3 days later on Easter Sunday, he rises again. But here's the thing, not everyone knew that yet. Like, some of them saw Jesus rise from the dead, but not all of the disciples. And then Jesus didn't hang around long. And like in these intervening weeks, he's like making miraculous appearances, and then he's disappearing. And so the disciples are left wondering, what the heck do? We followed you, we left our jobs, you died, you came back, some say, but you're not here with us. And so where we pick up our story, John chapter 21, verse 1, we find 7 disciples just kind of sitting on the beach, not sure what to do. This is what it says. Later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. And this is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, that's Peter that we just talked about. Thomas, nicknamed the twin. Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." "We'll come too," they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. A quick pause. I think it's really neat that when the disciples are left not knowing what the heck to do, they just go back to what they were familiar with. Many of these men were professional fishermen before they met Jesus. So when you're left not sure what to do, Peter's response is, well, I guess I'm going to go fishing. And as all of you in this room who have gone fishing know, sometimes you catch nothing. And also you know that's incredibly frustrating. So we continue on into verse 4. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" Which is not the question you want to be asked, when in fact you have caught no fish all night long. "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some." I have to imagine at least one of them rolled their eyes. These were professional fishermen. You catch nothing all night, and then sun rises, there's some guy on the beach yelling at you saying, "Hey, did you try that side of the boat?" Like, no, we've been on the water all night. We never thought about that side of the boat. But they listened to Jesus, and it says, so they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to shore. We'll stop there for a second. I think that is a beautiful picture of how excited Peter is to see Jesus. Like, have you guys ever had a moment where you were so surprised and so excited that just for a second you lost your mind? Like, sports are a great setting for this. Did anybody watch the Pacers on Wednesday? Yes? That unbelievable buzzer beater shot to send it to overtime, right? There's a moment like that where something so good, so surprising happens that just for a moment, you lose your mind. I think this is Peter. He's surprised to see Jesus, and he's so excited that he puts his clothes back on to go swimming. Because we all know you don't swim in your clothes, right? Peter was sensible. He's on the boat. He's in his swim trunks. But then he sees Jesus. He puts his clothes back on, and he swims to shore. Now, for us to appreciate what's going to come next in the story, we need to understand better the night that Peter denied Jesus. So we're going to do an activity together. We're going to have a conversation amongst ourselves. This is optional, and I'll explain that in a minute. But here's what I'd like. So if you're here with your family, that's a great group. But if you're here with just 1 or 2, maybe you could grab somebody that you met earlier at the start. Like, we're thinking groups of 4 to 8. And what we're going to do is we're going to read the passage where Peter denies Jesus. It's John chapter 18, verses 15 to 18, and then verses 25 to 27. You're welcome to read the stuff in the middle. It just doesn't pertain to Peter. After you guys have read that, you guys are going to discuss this question. What do you think Peter would have remembered from that night? And I want you guys to be creative. Think sights, sounds, smells, emotions. As Peter thinks back on this night, what do you think would have stuck with him? Now, like I said, this is optional. You don't have to talk to a stranger. If the thought of grouping up with someone sounds really uncomfortable, please feel free to read the passage yourself. And then we have an area in the app, in the notes for the sermon, where you can write down what your reflections are on this. But do this individually or circle up, and we'll read these 2 passages and then ask that question. I'll bring us back together in about 5 minutes, okay? Good? Great. All right, guys, you got about 1 minute left, so whoever's talking, maybe kind of finish up your thought, and then I'll bring us back together in 1 more minute. I know that was pretty quick, but I hope you guys were able to have something of a good conversation. I wish we had time right now to hear from all of your groups what your reflections were. We don't, but please find me after service. I would love to hear what you guys thought Peter would have remembered from that night. So we're going to get back to where we were in the story. You can turn back over to John chapter 21. We're going to be in verse 8. And if you'll remember where we left the story just a moment ago, Peter was so excited to see Jesus that he put his clothes back on and then jumped into the water to swim to shore, which, by the way, left everyone else in the boat with all the fish. So, verse 8, it says, "The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from shore. And when they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread." Okay, I'm going to pause this one more time. There's a really important word here for us to understand. Does anybody love vocab? Like vocab lessons? Yes? Okay, some of us. I didn't know if we'd have any hands. I do love vocab, and so we're going to do a quick vocab lesson today. It's not an English word, it's a Greek one, and the word is called anthrakia. Anthrakia. Now, this word's really cool. One, it's fun to say. Can we all say it together? Yeah? Count of three. 1, 2, 3. Anthrakia. Nice. Okay, so what makes this word really cool is not how it sounds. When translated to English, it means charcoal fire, which still is not what makes it really cool. The really neat thing about anthrakia is that it appears in the Bible a total of 2 times, and we have now read both of those passages this morning. The first time that anthrakia appears in the Bible, it's in John chapter 18, and it's the word that's used to describe the type of fire that Peter is beside when he denies Jesus. If you'll remember what you were reading just a moment ago, Peter was warming himself beside a fire. That word is anthrakia. It's a charcoal fire. And now Peter, so excited to see Jesus, has gotten to shore. He comes out of the water and he sees Jesus standing beside an anthrakia, a charcoal fire. Now, as I thought about what Peter would have remembered from that night, I thought of smells. Like, to me, smells are really powerful attachments to memory. Like, if you smell a certain baked good, it can immediately take you back to, like, grandma's at Christmas, right? Scents, smells, they stick with us. And any of us who have been at a cookout where there's a charcoal grill, you know that a charcoal fire has a really unique smell to it. And so as Peter comes out of the water, as he gets to the beach, I see him taking a deep breath and breathing in that smell of a charcoal fire, the smell of an anthrakia. And I have to imagine that he was brought back in that moment to the night when he denied Jesus, which again, I would imagine would be one of the worst nights of Peter's life. Anthrakia. Okay, now we continue on in verse 10. "Bring some of the fish you've just caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. "Now come and have some breakfast," Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the 3rd time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A 3rd time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a 3rd time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." This is a really famous story in the Bible, and as someone who has grown up in the church, I have heard this passage many times. I've read this passage many times, and until I was getting ready for today, I had always thought that, like, Jesus asking Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" Like, it was kind of Peter getting what he had coming to him. Not that Jesus is a get back at you kind of guy, because he's not, but like, man, Peter really blew it. The night before Jesus died, you deny him 3 times. Like, you're going to have to prove it 3 times, right? But I don't think that's what it is. And it's the word anthrakia that has changed this for me. See, it showed me how intentional this whole scene is. Peter denies Jesus 3 times in an interrogative conversation beside an anthrakia. And now, Jesus has recreated that scene. He has provided an interrogative conversation beside an anthrakia. I think this is not punishment, this is not penalty, but it's restoration. Jesus is giving Peter another shot. It's an intentional invitation to redemption. Each time that Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" he's giving him the chance to make right on the worst mistake of his life, perhaps to prove to himself more than anyone that he does, yes, love Jesus, that was simply a mistake. We have said all series long that the meals of Jesus give us a window into his gospel. And here's what I think this meal shows us. Failure is not final. All of us mess up. We make mistakes. We fall short of the glory of God. But Jesus went to the cross, died, and rose again to make sure that no matter what our mistakes, our doubts, our failings are, they won't be enough to keep us from him. They won't have the last word on our relationship with him. Whether we are a first century fisherman who has denied Jesus 3 times the night before he dies, or whether we are 21st century residents of Indiana with all of our modern addictions and sins and habits and problems, Jesus wants us to be redeemed to him, no matter how big our mistakes or our doubts or our failings. And today, if you feel like you and Jesus are not in a good place, like, that's what I want you to hear, and you are welcome to tune out the rest of this. That is enough for you to take away from today. But for those of us who say we follow Jesus, those of us who have a relationship with him, the message doesn't stop there. We can extend the same kind of grace and redemption to others in our lives. We too can make intentional invitations to redemption. Can we return back to the story I started with for a moment? When I realized that I had made a huge mistake, that I had broken such an expensive piece of equipment, I thought for sure that I was gonna lose my job. At the very least, I was gonna have something in my permanent record about what I had done. It was gonna be a big problem. But that isn't what happened. My boss, his name was Chris, he's a great man. He sat down with me afterwards and he asked, "Why did you do what you did?" Not in a "Why'd you do that?" kind of way, but in a walk me through what your thought process was. And I told him exactly what I told you guys at the beginning. And when I was done, his response was, "No, that checks through. That was a logical step. I'm gonna walk you through how to do this right." And the next month, when Chris again had to come up with what tasks we were each gonna be assigned, do you know who he gave replace the UPS batteries to? Me, right? It was an intentional invitation to redemption. It was a chance for me to make it right, and it showed that my failure, my mistake, wasn't final. Now, I know that's a silly story, and it's just equipment, and that's nothing compared to relationships and people. But I think the lesson still applies. So, kids in the room, maybe you have a friend who, if we can be honest, just you and me, they're a little bit obnoxious, a little bit annoying, and maybe you've come to a point where you're just kind of done with them. They're too irritating, and you'd rather not be around them anymore. What if instead of that, you gave them another chance? I know there's not much school left, but what if you invited them to sit with you at lunch, or if school's already done? What if one time this summer, you invited them to hang out with you? You gave them another shot. Parents, maybe you have a kid who recently really messed up one of the chores you gave them or a task you assigned to them. And honestly, it would be way easier for you to just do it yourself and not give it to them again. What if instead you took the time and the emotion and the effort to walk through it with them again, and then you give them another chance? Adults, I am sure that all of us have someone in our lives who recently has made a mistake and has damaged the relationship. A coworker that went behind your back on something, a significant other that recently ruined a date by being too aloof or irritable or distracted, or a family member who honestly is always a little irritating and you've decided inwardly that you're just not going to include them at family gatherings anymore. What if instead we gave those people in our lives a chance to make it right? It might and probably will be messy, but redemption is worth offering. If we, as people who follow Jesus, learn to model that kind of grace and forgiveness and redemption in our relationships, then soon our families, our church, our schools, our workplaces might look a little bit more like heaven and a little bit less like this messy and broken world that we're living in. Now, as a final thought, I really like to be realistic, and I understand that redemption is not always as easy as breakfast on a beach. I recently, it was 3 weeks ago, was sitting with a friend over coffee, and I asked him how he thought this story with Peter and Jesus would have gone if Peter had just stayed on the boat. Like, what if Peter was so ashamed and so uncomfortable with what he had done that when he saw Jesus on the shore, he just refused to leave the boat? Or what if he did get out of the boat, got to shore, but then when he saw Jesus, he's like, hey, so glad to see you, but can we leave this under the rug? Because I really don't want to go there right now. Like, what would have happened? And I don't know, and my friend didn't know either. That's not how it happened, but I am convicted that my friend Rudy was right when he said, I bet you Jesus would have made another fire. Like, if the first invitation didn't work, Jesus would have offered a second and a third and a fourth until Peter had been redeemed. Because for Jesus, nothing in the world matters more than us being made right with him. So for us, may we accept Jesus' invitation when we've messed up, whether it is the first time he's offered us grace or the 100th time. May we accept his invitation. And may we also be people who model his grace in our relationships. May we continue to offer invitations until redemption has been reached. May we be people who keep making those fires. May we give others a chance to make it right, because first we have been redeemed to God. Failure is not final. I promise you, it is not between you and God. And it also does not have to be final in our relationships if we will model his grace and his forgiveness. Let me pray. Jesus, we are so thankful for the message of your gospel and the hope, the forgiveness, the redemption that you offer to us. And today we want to accept that grace to be put back into right relationship with you. And we ask for the wisdom and the courage and the humility to offer that to those in our lives too. May we model your grace that we might make this world a little more like your kingdom. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.